Well, yeah, I got myself a new mic, and it's better than the phone. It's actually pretty crisp. I'm actually putting my laptop to use this time. And let's just get straight into it, man. Today we're gonna be talking about what I guess birth podcasts, radio. Today's a crazy day too, cause if you haven't known about the Breakfast Club is like one of the biggest or one of the biggest radio station morning shows or afternoon. I'm not sure, but one of the biggest radio station shows ever. And today it's just been canceled or like shut down. It doesn't run anymore. And I remember it used to go strong. It went strong for like at least 20 years. 20 years. Just going strong, man. Interviews, countless legendary just conversations, funny moments, inappropriate moments, controversial moments, honestly. It's a lot. And it's crazy how something so legendary or big or in anybody else's regards, because people have different opinions on it, but it's crazy how something like that could just fade, lose popularity, shrivel up, and die. And I guess it shows to the evolution of the culture. It's just something to think about. But let's start. Radio, man. I remember as a kid, it was just big. It was all I listened to, radio and TV, man. I used to just bank on them playing my favorite song. I would deal with every other song except my favorite being played from that DJ. And when my favorite song came on, I would embrace the moment. I would turn up the volume and I would just soak it all in, because it won't be until like another 2 days till that song gets played again. You know how it was. The rotation was crazy. Unless your song was popular, man, listen. But it definitely had a strong hold on music. Definitely did. Back then, for you to get popular, you had to go through radio. You had to have your song circulated through the radio, because that's what the people were listening to. And that's what people like inspired to buy your tracks. And a lot of DJs did get paid, or people really like put in money to DJs to get their stuff out there, because DJs were the access. And it was like a one-way street, I'll say. Yeah, like a one-way street. Streams, people getting paid off of just radio play and CD sales or album sales. That was it. And it was like that for like a good while. Before my time, it was. Again, like 90s, 80s, the radio was it. People would celebrate, artists would celebrate. There's so many movies and stories about when the artists heard their songs on the radio and they freaked out and they were happy, because that's how you know you made it or you're progressing somewhere. That's how big radio was. And so it was strong for at least a good 50 years. 50 years, I would say, because I don't necessarily know the timeline, but all I know is that it's been around for long enough, for a while, okay? And I'll say toward the 2010s is when the shift came. Streaming services started coming up, SoundCloud, Spotify, stuff like that. Tidal, I remember Tidal when Jay-Z announced Tidal. That was pretty big too. I'm not sure how that's doing, but Pandora was like, oh, and people were like, oh, what's this? Is this a new way to access music? See, YouTube was another way to access music at the time, but it wasn't making a change, I'll say, in radio. It wasn't competition. Because then again, radio hosts and shows would just talk about YouTube videos and it would just be connected. People would just like post clips on YouTube, and the people would be like, oh, we need to listen to a radio show because that's the only way we could listen. And that's how it was. But when those streaming services came up, People were like, oh, what's this? And they were able to start listening to music through ulterior things. You know what I'm saying? Ulterior things. And then I'll say it didn't really catch on that quick. But then in a good 4 to 5 years, when artists started taking advantage of streaming services, that's when I feel like radio took a hit. Radio took a hit. And I feel like I'll say hip hop and rap took a big hit. Because a lot of radio stations were based off one genre per se. And the DJs had the freedom to choose what they wanted to play or not. They did. You know what I'm saying? They had the freedom to let you get which song or which type of music you will receive. That's why there was different radios, different radio stations for different people. And now you have access to all that music at once, and you can have it for yourself. You don't necessarily have to rely on somebody to go in a rotation of your favorite songs and then go through a rotation of somebody else's favorite songs, or you're not limited to one genre. It was a change. It was a big change. Opened a lot of people's eyes. And now I think about it, I guess radio did take another hit too, because a lot of radio was biased. It was more conservative. The radio technique in general, I'll say, is conservative. Just you confined to a car or maybe your phone, because they had the iHeartRadio app, but mostly your car, and you have to listen to somebody play music and then hear them speak, hear them have promos, the commercials, all that. It's pretty conservative, and I guess people were starting to get tired of it. And I definitely get it. Now. But it still has an old-fashioned twang to it, and it still has originality. There's something special about it. There's always something special in the original that the newer versions won't have. I'll say that. Yeah, that's what I'll say. But I guess when artists started taking advantage, when artists started taking advantage of streaming services, they realized they were able to get their music out there without having to go through radio, without having to pay someone, without having to try to convince someone or be confined to one piece or one path. And it took the world by storm. So many people started dropping music. Artists, people who weren't certified, people who didn't necessarily have to be a big name. And this was a good thing, because this is how a lot of artists are made now. You don't have to have a certain level to drop music, because that should not be required of you. You should be able to drop the music you want. Well, I'm not going to pretend like everybody should drop music, because some people's music is trash. I'm going to be real with you. Y'all should keep that to yourselves. The world will be better off, or just be a better place. But like I said, it's not fair that you have to go to one person for your music to be shared. It sucks, and it's not fair. Everyone should be independent and have their own free will when it comes to music. And so when people took advantage of that, I guess just went on a spree. Artists were discovered, Brent Faiyaz, for example. That man was just a SoundCloud artist. He started off just dropping music on SoundCloud, and people started picking it up. People started loving it, and people were appreciating it. And just like that, he skyrocketed. In a couple years, this man was just like a hidden gem. He went from a hidden gem to a mainstream R&B. In my opinion, he's the king. I'm sorry. That Wasteland album was perfect. 10 out of 10. But like I was saying, artists like him, they got discovered by the media or just the people. And they got to choose what they wanted to do with them, not the radio. The radio didn't determine how many streams Brent got or how many times his songs get played. And that made the difference. Then SoundCloud really started picking up, and Spotify just took off. Spotify just turned super professional after a while, and just like that, like Spotify was considered the tip top. I'll say it is the tip top. It's the tip top of just audio, listening to music in general. Everybody, like, Spotify is it. If you don't have Spotify, you're not having the best quality per se, which I could agree with. Also Apple Music, but it's a little bit shaky over there. But anyways, that was good. And then podcasters started popping up more and more through YouTube. Originally through YouTube videos with like videos, or sometimes it'll be the person speaking in the microphone, but a lot of time it will just be pictures and videos. And it took the world by storm. In like the 2010s, I'll say 2012-ish, 2010, like people started telling stories, telling jokes, just talking about stuff in their own opinion. And people were like, I love this. I love hearing someone's opinion. And it was like, wow. And people wanted more. People wanted more. A lot of YouTubers took off like that, you know, the OGs, all of them. And that was what I guess started off podcasts. And then they started transitioning into, I guess, I'll say SoundCloud and Spotify and Apple Music, because YouTube started to not pay them well. You know, YouTube started getting crazy with their demonetization, and they started cutting on how much people get paid for. Because I remember there was a time where you made bank off of YouTube. It's not so easy now. That's why people are going to Twitch and stuff. Because YouTube is not necessarily where the money's at anymore. You could still make money, but you're going to have to grind a little bit more than that. And I guess when they flocked to Spotify and SoundCloud, it was like, okay, people get to hear what I want to say, and I don't necessarily get charged, or like it doesn't limit my range, because a lot of times people's stuff wouldn't be advertised or promoted on YouTube, or YouTube would just like not show their things, and people have important stuff to say. And like that, radio started falling behind, because this new cool concept of just going to a podcast, having it around, not necessarily being in a car. You don't have to be in a car to listen to somebody. It's like fire. And the thing about radio is that, again, it's old fashioned. It's a more conservative type, where it's like it stuck to its roots. It refused to evolve. That's what I think was like one of the problems of radio. It refused to evolve. The DJs refused to evolve. They didn't want to change with the times. A lot of DJs are or were old fashioned. You know, the hard rock ones, the ones that just wanted to do what they did 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. And I guess they didn't want to change. And as the older generation starts dying out, they might not necessarily listen to radio like that. And then our generation, Generation Z, is on the uprise. And I'll say millennials in general just stop listening to radio. And Gen Z, I don't even think we listen to radio. Barely. Like, there's a small portion of us. I barely do. Because podcasts just seem to captivate our attentions more. It seems to just grasp what we want. And radios try to like adapt or cling on. Some radio stations tried to change. Some radio stations have successfully changed, but some have been left behind. For example, I'll say this: iHeartRadio has just not really been the same, or just been itself at all. Like, yeah, it's still around, but are people necessarily talking as much anymore? Are people tuning in as much anymore? Like, supporting it, boosting it? I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. Nobody's necessarily trying to go to a radio host to hear their opinion on stuff or hear news, because you get your news from the phone. You get your news from the media. You don't gotta go to the radios no more. Radios, they're like, what are you here for? That's the idea people have now. And again, since radios are confined, when they're not now, but I guess the idea of radio is still stuck with a stereo or a car, like a car stereo or house stereo, or just this big lumbery machine that you carry around with an antenna. And I guess the image of radio has been ingrained and stuck with that machine. And like I was saying, nobody wants to go to radio to hear the DJ's opinion like that, because you have a podcaster, you have someone that seems to be more personal talking to you. Because that's another thing about podcasting, it seems more like a one-on-one or an individual talk. You know what I mean? Radio, it seems like he's talking to a broad audience. They're talking to a broad audience. Like, oh, everybody. Podcast is like, oh, me and you. It seems more singular. And I feel like people like that more. Yeah, so that was that. And so radio definitely took a big hit from that. Another thing is that, I'll say this. Radio was not necessarily the best when it came to diversity. It wasn't that diverse. The radio stations kind of use the same tactics. They use the same tactics, low key. They just started off in the morning, maybe saying the news. In the evening time, they played, like, in the afternoon, they played, like, the jams, like, the things people like, that was active. And then in the nighttime, they played, like, the closers. And they would repeat this. Like, they would just play, like, closing songs. And it would be very similar. And for at least months on end, you would hear no different songs. Like, okay, you'll be excited about the new songs on the radio for, like, the first week. But 2 months in and nothing's really changed. That's harsh. And it's like the radio station guy, again, they do advertising. They have other stuff to do, so they're not necessarily entertaining you with other than music. Or maybe they had an opinion here and there. That was true too. But the people out there doing radio not necessarily had the best opinion. Sometimes it was ignorant. Sometimes it was hard-headed. And the culture changed. People became more open, more vocal, more, I guess, more accepting. And they tried to tackle some ignorant topics some radio hosts had, some controversial topics. And the radio hosts who stood their ground, or the radio stations that stood their ground, suffered badly. For example, saying certain things on the radio in interviews is deemed like inappropriate, and you actually will be held accountable. Maybe back then, oh yeah, it's just a radio guy, he's doing his job. But now, the media actually holds you accountable, and I feel like that is one of the biggest impacts on radio. That's what could have helped kill it. The change in how people saw things. Me Too movement, like just the idea of being more aware about what you say. It just grew in people's mind, and people became more careful, a more conscious society, and they saw radio as not deemed fit. again, like I said, more of a conservative idea. And you know how today people feel about conservatives. Yeah, it's just an ongoing fight right there. But yeah, it seems like radio's dying. More and more radio stations just stop having people talk and just have people play. Just check for yourself. How many radio stations do you hear people actually going for like a 10-minute conversation? Or like just like, oh, caller number one, caller number two. Oh my god. Well, what I have to say is you don't really hear that no more. All you hear is someone like say a little something here and there, and then they just go back to playing the songs. Or sometimes they don't have no one say anything at all. The radio host is not necessarily a valued person or a necessary person. And I feel like since it's been labeled with the machine, well, it's about to die. As long as people have cars, that might keep radio alive. That's another thing. That might be the only thing that could keep radio alive. The fact that people will always have cars, and cars and radio will be linked. And I guess some people will just continue listening to radio because it's in their car. And they did try the Sirius XM, which I'm not going to call it a flop. It's somewhat successful, but it's not a grip or a hold as they thought it could be or it could have been compared to just streaming services in general. And it's not even like radio's the only one taking a hit. Think about it. YouTube. Oh yeah. Yeah, people, YouTube, I'm not going to say YouTube is dying, but YouTube is definitely on a downhill path in my opinion. It is. People are starting to not get paid. Creators are starting to become dissatisfied. Other services are starting to be put, such as Patreon, Twitch, and one day, maybe not in our time, one day YouTube will be dethroned because their algorithm, there's a lot of issues with their like ratio. It's just very controversial stuff, and it could lead in a downhill spiral, or they could bounce back. Because then again, YouTube is special because you can watch any video you want with no penalty. It's free. You know what I'm saying? That's what made YouTube special. But yeah, it was crazy. It's crazy, man. But I feel that now that radio is being put to rest, podcasts now have taken on the power or the influence that radio first had. You know, everybody's listening to a podcast. Everybody's trying to start a podcast, and that's another thing that I'll say is one of the best things about podcasts. Anyone could start it. Not everyone could start a radio station. You actually had to get funding and you had to buy or run out of place, get all this equipment. Nah, podcasting, you could just hop on your phone and talk. That's what I did for my first video. I just bought equipment. I just bought a mic. And I'm recording this on my laptop. I don't need to get an internship. I don't need to rent out a building to do this. I get to do this in the comfort of my own home. Started from scratch by myself. Only takes a good 5 hours to start it if you really wanted to. Maybe a little bit more if you're more dedicated and you have more equipment if you want. But yeah, it doesn't take that much to start. And I guess quick access and speed has been determining the winner of all this. Because people's attention span and people's just what they're willing to wait for. They want stuff quick. They want things fast. And radio's slow. Radio is slow. So that's definitely a thing that killed it. And it's kind of sad when you grew up seeing these giant radio corporations just fall, seeing them fall and crumble to stuff that started by a group of people, or one person or two people. You know what I'm saying? And now podcasts kind of rule the waves now. They've taken over. They're winning. Communications, when it comes to radio, is like a dying job. Media's competing with TV too. TV's in danger, but I feel like TV's gonna stick around way longer. But yeah, radio's a dying job. It's a dying profession. That's the one I'm getting into. I'm not gonna be in radio because, you know, again, I discussed this topic, so it's like, obviously I'm not gonna do that. I'm not dumb, but yeah, it's been knocked off. Podcast might be the king. All hail the king, I guess.